Hiya folks, it's Kikoskia here and welcome back to DMing and me. This video contains no gameplay or music whatsoever, allowing you to focus on whatever it is you're up to, whether it's starting up a monster, reading the next encounter, designing the next town, or preparing for the beginning of your campaign. The beginning has a lot of prep work that you have to go through. If it is a pre-written campaign, you need to get to grips with what's ultimately going on in the campaign, and also what's happening at the very beginning, and the place where the beginning is set. If it's campaign you're writing yourself, you have all of that to create. You'll have the end goal in mind, but you have to get there first, and that involves a lot of writing, planning, plotting, scheming, and creating. We're not here to talk about that part of the beginning. We're here to talk about getting the party set up to go on the adventure. We're talking about character generation through the eyes of the DM. You're not the one creating these characters. You run all the other characters, and if it's your campaign that you've created, you made them as well. But these people are not yours. They are run by the players. And there's a lot of things you do to make sure this process goes well, even if the players don't realise what you're doing. But let's start at the beginning. How does the character creation process work? Quite simply, they're creating a party, and you're overseeing it. They'll be going through the character generation process, discussing with each other what they want to do, and at the end, there will be a group of people. Whether these people will be adventuring in a world of fantasy, travelling through the stars in a spaceship, or exploring the nitty-gritty world of the modern day. It's them versus the campaign, and ideally you want them to make a party that will actually make it through that campaign. This usually encompasses having a general balance of skills, but don't look at a party that they have created that doesn't have this and dismiss it immediately. In fact, don't dismiss any suggestions that they make instantly. Don't dismiss anything that they suggest without thinking about it. That is the most important thing concerning any aspect of DMing, but especially concerning character generation, because their ideas fuel your campaign. They could come up with something that you haven't thought about, and that gives you a plethora of potential plot hooks and little bits of lore and story that you can weave in, and you may come up with a dozen NPCs that you'll have to make at one point that will enrich the campaign so much more. Remember what I said previously about the ultimate objective of tabletop role-playing, which is that everybody is out to have fun and enjoy themselves. And if they want to run a group where there will be skills that they lack and they'll have to come up with interesting and unique ways to fill in those holes, by all means, let them try. Don't let them, however, make an entirely dysfunctional party that is going to disintegrate no sooner the first challenge is presented before them. You can very quickly tell when these kinds of parties are being formed. They will have characters that have drastically conflicting alignments and ideals, ones that will clash and will cause party conflict, which I talked about last time, that will very quickly boil over into much worse things. These parties also tend to have no skills that will help them get through even the very early game. One example I can think of this is that I did quite a lot of play-by-post roleplay at one point, and I was running a game that didn't last too long because the group ended up fizzling out. And the reason why the group ended up fizzling out is because they created an entire team of non-combatants in a very combat-heavy campaign. Now, I pretty much said at the beginning that there would be a need for a roughly well-balanced party. There needed to be at least one person that was skilled in combat, and they went with a group of people who couldn't fight at all. Suffice to say, I told them that they shouldn't do that because they wouldn't be able to even get past the first encounter, and reluctantly, they did make other characters, but by the second encounter it was very clear that their hearts weren't in the campaign anyway, and so it ended up fizzling out. The ultimate thing to take away from it is, even though I said that you should let them experiment with interesting party compositions, you do need to make sure that they can at the very least get through your campaign somehow. It's no fun, after all, if the entire party gets absolutely obliterated partway through the first adventure, and then you either have to pick something else, or you have to start again. Which is always a peculiar experience, because they know the stuff that leads up to where they got stuck, and it doesn't have the same impact that it did the first time round. Focusing now on individual people as opposed to the entire team, every person goes through the character creation process differently. Some people work with the rest of the players to make sure that all the various skill bases are accounted for. Other people prefer to come up with a character concept by themselves and then bring that to the table on the day. Issues can arise between the players when people want to have the same role, and there's only really space in the party for one of them. The classic example is in D&D, where some people don't want to play the fighter. I enjoyed playing fighter types, also really enjoyed playing divine casters as well. More often than not, they tend to blur together and I end up with a fighty divine character. Much like how I have Kiran in my current campaign, and I had Barry in the campaign before that. Barry was much more of a caster, but that's besides the point. In a cookie-cutter D&D party, you will have the frontline fighter, you'll have the arcane spellcaster, the divine spellcaster, and the roguish skill type. If you have a fifth party member, that allows for someone to double up on a skill, or take something that isn't represented by anyone else, a more specialist role. But usually there isn't that leeway, and so you have to carefully negotiate with the players as to who is going to pick that role. And if two people are adamant on playing the same role, you have two options. You either let them both play the same role, and thus you have the lopsided skill base and then something will be lacking, or you work with the players to come up with a compromise. Compromise is key in DMing and running tabletop roleplay sessions. And in character creation, the compromise comes in providing an incentive for one of the players to not pick the thing that they were initially intending to create. Sometimes this can come from suggesting alternate ways of getting what they want, like starting off as a class they weren't initially intending to be, and then showing them a class that they can later prestige into, like you can in 3.5, which will give them some of the things that they want, like somebody who wants to be a arcane spellcaster, but they already have somebody that's being an arcane spellcaster. You can go, hey, you could go into rogue, and then you could go into arcane trickster, for instance, and that will give you the roguish talents, and it will also give you some arcane flavour. They'll end up having to multi-class as a rogue wizard, but you still have that skill set of the rogue in the party, and you'll end up with a team that has a lot of arcane punch as well, which is pretty decent. And the way to find out how you can reach this compromise is to listen. Listening is an exceptionally important skill as a DM. You need to listen not only in the sessions to what your players are thinking of doing and their motives and the logic behind their actions, but you also need to listen while they're coming up with their characters, because not only will you find the amazing little bits of plot and lore and ideas that they'll throw at you while they're creating them, but you'll also be able to hear what they actually want to achieve ultimately with the character they're making. You may find out that it doesn't actually matter what class they're going to be, as long as they can get that same backstory and the character that they are making. The character can be adapted and tweaked to work with whatever class is required, and you working with them to make sure that happens will mean that they have a character that they're happy with regardless of what class they end up making. Sometimes, however, you'll end up with the extreme of that, where somebody wants to make a very particular character that really doesn't fit into the setting. Either the race that they want to play as isn't there, the class that they want to play as doesn't exist, or the backstory that they're working on does not mesh with the place that they are in. That is where you'll have to sit down and work quite a bit with the player. This doesn't happen too often in a sci-fi or fantasy setting because they're so big and vast that you can usually find a way to accommodate what they want. Though, with things like a extraordinary race that isn't really prevalent in the setting, but it does require a lot of extra work to make it happen. If they're playing as a race that really isn't present in the setting, and you do decide that they can play that character, you will have to think about all of the NPCs that they encounter and how they will react to this person that is extraordinary. Adventurers are extraordinary by design. They are the heroes, they are people who grow to be exceptionally significant and powerful, but if they start out with, say, a Thri-kreen in the party, when the rest of them are 2 humans and a half-elf, that Thri-kreen is going to get a lot of attention, because Thri-kreen really aren't that common residents of small farming communities. One thing you will need to impress upon the player is that, with them being such an extraordinary character, they can't act as if no one will give them looks and think that they're peculiar. Unless, and there's a very narrow caveat for this, unless one of their character traits is that they're absolutely oblivious to absolutely any reactions they get from anyone. I've seen a character like that, and they were hilarious, because all kinds of interesting situations occurred that they were the instigators of, and they had no idea they were doing it. They would go and see the local duke at a banquet who hadn't heard about the fact that they were in the group, and as soon as they entered into the banquet hall, everyone stopped. Food was dropped onto plates, there were gasps, everyone was staring, the guards were looking warily at them, and this character, who had no idea that their alarm was because they were there, and they thought it was just because they'd walked in and they hadn't, for some reason, expected the party to actually attend this banquet, just went, "So, where are we sitting?" And the fear and bewilderment of all the people in the banquet dissolved instantly, because the reaction that came from this character was so atypical, so unexpected, and yet so utterly ordinary that they immediately knew that they were no threat, and they had managed to navigate, just through that, a very difficult diplomatic quagmire. That was one of the situations where it went well. Quite often, it didn't go so well, but it was one of the things that made that campaign exceptionally interesting. And it wouldn't have been possible if they hadn't have been allowed to play something so unusual. Sometimes, however, compromise will just not work. Sometimes this person is adamant about playing the wizard, and they won't play something that will eventually become a wizard, and they won't play one of the other classes, and they're annoyed that the other person won't give up the idea for their wizard character. You're at an impasse. You've given suggestions for other things, and they've all been shot down, and there does come a time when eventually you as the DM just have to shrug and go, well, there's nothing I can suggest here. I've given you loads of options. We have loads of different things that you can be. You don't want to be any of them. Your move. While you are trying to work with the players to come up with something that is fun and for everyone, sometimes you just have to shrug and go, well, I can't do anything, and leave it in the players' hands. Sometimes they'll decide that they're actually going to play something else. Sometimes they will just turn around and go, well, actually, this campaign's not for me, and they'll walk away from the table. And while that stings when it happens, it's probably for the best, because it wouldn't have ended well if they'd have decided reluctantly and begrudgingly to pick something else, and then found some contrived way to get them killed so that they could then make the character that they wanted. A ruse that you will most certainly see through, and will get you right back to square one. There are, by the way, a few things that you do want to look out for when you are in the character creation process. One of these is for a character that you're a little concerned may decide to just go and kill all the rest of the party. If I give an example, we have a party that has a paladin, a cleric of a good-aligned deity, it has a wizard, and then it has the chaotic evil rogue whose background involves burning houses down and slaughtering guards. That isn't going to be a character that is going to mesh with the rest of the team. In a party which is more leaning towards the evil alignments, that could most certainly work. But even then, it has to be very carefully piloted by a very skilled player. In the party I've just given you there, that will not work at all. What's going to happen is that they're going to start on their adventure, the paladin is going to use detect evil at some point, the rogue is going to ping as evil, there's going to be a confrontation, and the party is going to end up fighting itself. That's not good. It behooves you to talk to the person playing the rogue very early on and say, quite plainly, that that character will not work in this campaign or with the party that's currently being formed, and that they should do something different. They may decide they want to play a different character altogether, or they may just tweak it so that it fits into an alignment more befitting the rest of the group. But watch out for that latter one, because some people will say, oh, my character is actually good, and they're not. Some people will just say that to appease you, and they've written neutral good on their character sheet, and it's anything but, and they're just going to go around slaughtering people anyway. You can just get rid of the G on that and turn it into an E. And probably the N and turn that into a C. I wouldn't, however, encourage you to impose hard alignment restrictions on what they can create. An example of this would be the video game The Temple of Elemental Evil, where you have to pick a party alignment when you're generating your team, and your characters can only be either that alignment or one step away. That's good for creating party unity, in as such that everyone is very close to that central alignment, but I find that far too restrictive. I'd much prefer to work with the players if there is a problem that arises and try my best to create a team that is more organically formed. If I'd have had those restrictions in place in campaigns that I played and ran, I wouldn't have had such brilliant experiences as my lawful evil warforged being bestest friends with the chaotic good cleric, or Kiran, my chaotic good holy liberator, being such great friends with the lawful evil rogue. Of all the alignments that seem to be most conflicting in my games that I run or play in, it's those two that seem to appear the most often. I wonder why. I'll have to think about that. One other thing you should watch out for when you are in the character creation process is you should look for the general power level of the team and what the players are focusing on when they're creating it, because there are different power levels of character through clash choices, yes, but also through design. There are people who prefer to create characters as role-playing experiences first and foremost. They create them with deep character backgrounds, and they focus less on the overall power of the character and more on creating something interesting. And if you have an entire party that does that, that's fantastic, because you'll have a rich role-playing experience and you know the general power level of the team, and nobody is going to outshine anyone else purely by design. Then there is the opposite end of the scale. The former there are role players, R-O-L-E, and then there's role players, who are R-O-L-L. These people, the primary thing that they are working towards when they're designing their class is power. They want to create strong characters, and characters that are really good at what they set out to achieve. They have high stats, they have skills that synergize flawlessly, they picked the right feats, they're aiming for prestige classes that further bolster their power. Another way to describe these people are min-maxers, because they maximize what they're great at and try to minimize what they aren't great at. And you may think I'm about to say that they're terrible, but they're not. It's as valid a way to play any tabletop role-playing game as any other, and if you have an entire party of people who are focusing on power and strength and being amazingly good at what they do, that's no bad thing. And just because people are making characters that are exceptionally powerful and minimize their weaknesses and maximize their strengths doesn't mean to say they aren't going to be rich and deep characters as well. Do not presume that those people are just going to make Bob the fighter, who actually could fight the gods with his little finger and prevail in 2 rounds because he is designed to be absolutely unkillable. Beware, however, when you have a mixture of these that could cause an issue. One example of this would be a party that has 3 people who have characters who are either role players, R-O-L-E, or just normally designed, and one person who is unfathomably mighty. That person is very likely to steal the spotlight in anything that they're skilled in. Combats could end before they even begin. Potentially challenging diplomatic encounters can be easily walked over by this person who has the ability to turn die-hard enemies into steadfast allies with but a few words. We actually have someone in our party that can do this in the current campaign I'm playing in. His diplomacy skill is absurd. To be fair, we are now level 20, but being able to roll 40 plus on diplomacy without rolling is an amazing ability. That said, it is counteracted by the fact that he's not actually that great at combat, because he's quite old now, and he's scattered his classes and abilities all over the place. He can hold his own better than he thinks, but he very much is the support character, a leader character, a diplomacy character. And that's fine. The problem comes when somebody can do that, and they can also fight dragons by themselves, and teleport to different planes, and have exceptional divination powers, and they can just do everything. And they not only steal the spotlight, they use the spotlight to trample over everything. That's going to be a problem, and you can usually see that quite early on with the character generation, by asking where they see their character going and what they think they can do. And if it looks like that's not going to be the general power level of the game, you need to talk to them about it. You need to head this off at the pass, because the last thing you want to have happen is for this character to curb stomp things for an entire adventure, and for everyone else to be bored. Because they will probably be bored. They won't have anything to do. They'll just be the cheerleader squad for the absolutely awesomely, amazingly strong character. And the amazingly strong character will be having a whale of a time, most likely, and probably won't realise that everybody else isn't enjoying it. You want to stop that from happening, and the way to do that is through talking to them about it and trying to come up with a compromise. Trying to see if they can make a version of the character that isn't as powerful, to get them in line with everyone else. It's easier to do that than it is to get everyone else to build characters that are exceptionally powerful. The role players, ROLE, won't want to do that. They'll be very reluctant. And I'm one of those people, I have to say. I tend to make characters that don't start out especially strong. I mean, Barry, the cleric that ended up surviving the entire of the last campaign I was in, not this mod, actually took martial weapon proficiency greatsword as a feat. That is something that some people will look at and go, what? Why didn't you just take a level of fighter? And the answer is because I wanted to have the ability to use greatswords as a cleric, and didn't want to take fighter. Not a powerful choice, but a thematic choice for my character, and one that ultimately was pretty awesome, but that's besides the point. Depending upon the player and the group, it could end up being that you come up with a compromise there, or that player decides they don't want to play, but ultimately, it's better to deal with these things, anything that you think may be an issue in character generation, at character generation, because it is a lot harder to do it once you are in the campaign itself. You end up having to retroactively do things and alter things that have happened, and it can get very messy. But provided that you are clear, honest with people, straightforward, and willing to work as best you can with them to come up with something that everyone will be happy with, your campaign will be all the stronger for it. Just remember, ultimately it's about having fun. And if you end up having to bend a few things in the campaign or the adventures to make it work so that everyone will have a blast, then so be it. Fun takes priority over all. But don't have it so that only one person's fun takes priority over all. Everyone needs to have fun. And if that means that you have to stop someone from making Pun Incarnate, or you prevent someone from making the backstabbing, chaotic, evil rogue in a party full of paladins, or a paladin in a party of backstabbing evil people, if the opposite does happen, then so be it. You have to make sure that everyone will enjoy themselves, and that ultimately the campaign will work, because if it just fizzles out and dissolves after one session because the character creation ended with nobody happy, it's going to show. And the campaign will probably end before it's begun. It'll take a few sessions and a few adventures before you get the hang of doing this. But I assure you, just keep the fact that everybody needs to have fun in mind, and that it's best to be straightforward and work to compromise with people when you're generating characters, and you'll end up with a party full of interesting and wonderful characters, and you'll make memories in that campaign that will likely stick with you for the rest of your life. And so, that is my advice on character generation from the DM's perspective. Hopefully, that will help you when you're starting out your campaign. And when we come back, folks, we will discuss another thing about tabletop role-playing. But what thing will that be? If you have a particular suggestion, by all means mention it in the description. And before I end here, I just want to mention that Chapter 6 of the Threnody of Dusseldom is now available to be read. If you want to check it out, follow a link in the description, or go to kikoskia.com/writing/Dusseldom, spelled DUSTLEDOM. You'll find it right there, and I hope you enjoy it. And so, when we come back, folks, more DMing and me. And I hope this has been helpful for you. And so, I'll catch you next time, folks, and I'll see you then. Later.